start off with as well. All right, if Alabama seems to be the unanimous number one team in the country, which pretty much is the case, that doesn't mean you agree with that. Who would be your number two? Would it be Georgia? Would it be Ohio State? Clemson? Who would it be?
To me, it's Ohio State. I think with C.J. Stroud coming back and Jackson Smith and Jigba and every weapon they have in that offense, and then you add Jim Knowles to that defense, which everybody we've talked to from Columbus says that they don't believe talent's the issue, it's scheme. Well, if he can scheme them up slightly better, this is a team who lost 2 games last year, one of them to Oregon and one of them to Michigan, where they got run right at. So if you can shore that up just a little bit, they don't have to be the best Ohio State defense ever in a year. If they can get a little bit better, to me, they're the number 2 team. Georgia's still up there, but they did lose a lot from that team that was very senior-laden and veteran-laden. And when you win the national championship, you get rated. Look, ask LSU what it was like to win the first one in a long time and then completely, have the roster gutted in a year. Now, Georgia's a little bit better off, obviously, depth-wise than they were, but even still, you got to allow for a little bit of a comeback down to earth with them, and we'll see what Clemson gets out of their quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with all that. I think that it's fair to think that Georgia might take a bit of a step down, although I think they're kind of in that Alabama position right now where any step down for them is – minute compared to what step downs actually are for most programs around the country, where you'd be looking at a full-on rebuild following a season like that. Instead, they just reload. But, I think I'd look at it the same way. And I'm very curious just because we got so used to Clemson being in that same mix and being in that position themselves of just kind of how they are following a year where it wasn't like that for the first time in a while, where we weren't talking about them week in and week out necessarily right there alongside the other contenders. And, they had a pretty good run there at quarterback for a while. Their situation's still better than most, but it's enough of a question mark that it's kind of like, okay, let's see kind of what happens here. And enough of a question mark to wonder if we're not going to see a young Texan see some snaps this season. They're interesting to see how they bounce back, so to speak. But I'd go Ohio State at 2. I think they're pretty loaded, although, we'll see how Jim Knowles does defensively. There's plenty of reason to believe that, he might have a little bit of growing pains. That would be probably understandable in most places, but I know the Ohio State, that's kind of, in their eyes, the missing piece with all they have offensively. So we'll see if he can connect those dots and get them into that position. But, yeah, they should be really good.
There are some of you who answered it yourself. Ohio State's part of it. In fact, some, who was it, Paxton, Utah at 4 for me. Okay. Obviously with a lot back. Georgia, Utah, 3 and 4 from Joey. And some other responses as well from those of you. The Ohio State University, Ohio State, Alabama, Ohio State 1 and 2, Ohio State, Bama 1 and 2. And the reason I brought that up, we have started so many shows, and deservedly and obviously expected, with what is happening because of college football's changes. College football possibly with the playoff, the expansion, it's dead for at least a couple of years, it appears. And really NIL and transfer portal. And I just thought it would be refreshing and although Dennis Dodd's coming on in a minute to talk about realignment, to just ask a football question about possibly wins and losses.
Well, and I'll say this again, going back to Ohio State. Baylor had a situation, after its first couple of years of success with Art Briles, where they could score nearly at will, but so could everyone that played them. So they needed to bring in a defensive coordinator, and I think the expectations early on for Phil Bennett were, okay, in a year, he's going to make this defense into, the doomsday defense. Well, that was not the goal. If Baylor is only losing, when they lose by 10 to 14 points, 2 touchdowns at a point where they're gassed and the defense can't stop anybody or losing late, then all the goal really needs to be to incrementally get better is 1 or 2 possessions a half, maybe just 1 a quarter is kind of the goal of 1 a quarter, don't give up a touchdown.
Yes.
Then that's 28 points less that you've given up. And then all of a sudden you saw, while Baylor's defensive numbers were still objectively terrible, they were still winning games by 24 points because they weren't giving up those ridiculous garbage touchdown, but like wide open touchdowns.
I thought they could if it could be just 1 stop a half.
Yeah, again.
Because it wasn't, few and far between.
Yeah, and then that first year was, RG3 wins the Heisman and they go 10-3 and win the Alamo Bowl. And And the Alamo Bowl was a terrible defensive performance. I wish I could quote what Phil said to me the morning after when I saw him in the lobby, but I can't. But they got better incrementally over time to the point where just right down the line, here they are winning Big 12 championships.
From Sergeant Pickles 13, throw out the 6 or 7 usual suspects when it comes to your top 4 or 5 into a blender, pull out 4. I have to admit I care very little for rankings anymore. They don't mean what they used to. And I think that what rankings mean more than anything else is just good fodder and discussion, maybe a little bit of fan base argument, and we have some of that going on anyway, but it is kind of neat, and it's a pride factor. And it's also, hey, wait a minute, somebody doesn't believe in us, and people like to manufacture a chip as well.
That's just TV networks putting numbers on teams to get you to watch more. Because what's going to get you to pull in Utah versus Cal coming up this Saturday, or number 12 Utah, number 15 Cal. This game matters because of these numbers in front of them, right? I like the rankings, but I don't like them necessarily right out of the gates because it just feels like they sort of get to set the chess pieces up the way they want to. And, you know, there's some, at least maybe not so much now in the playoff era, but previously you could kind of just like get the fortune of being selected pretty high right out of the gates. And then you're just kind of set for, you know, a majority of the year because of how high you started off, even if it was undeserved. It was just all based off what they read in Phil Steele's, basically. It's like, oh, you're number 3 in the country. You had a good recruiting class and stuff. It's just like we're just guessing because we have seen no games whatsoever. We're just really going off of last year and what we think you did this offseason. So you're number 3 in the country. And didn't even let them, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was a TV thing to put numbers there to get people to have a sexier matchup to watch rather than just Team A versus Team B. Gave it some feeling of, like, it matters and they're ranked teams and all that. I like that when I know that they're ranked for a reason. I don't like it in week 1 when it's like this is just what reporters thought should be the top 5, top 25 teams.
You know what's just funny about it? Because of the preseason rankings, you'll have things like, well, LSU beat Texas when Texas was number 11 in the country, but that team was never at any point the 11th best team in the country unless they were only 11 teams in the country.
Exactly.
Like that would have, like they were not the 11th best team. But then later on, as part of a debate, when they're trying to do the first 8, well, like they beat the number 11 team in the country.
Yeah.
They beat the number 6 team in the country. They beat what are those teams now when you're making the rankings? That's what they are, not what they were, or not what somebody said they were arbitrarily before anybody played more than a game.
Before there was evidence. One of the things, though, that used to happen, and I believe this is maybe even back before the playoff, and perhaps it's still part of the deal with the playoff. We don't know because we always get a different answer from the committee each week. But you might beat a team that actually was very, very highly ranked early in the year, and then they had injuries, suffered a quarterback problem, a quarterback injury, was legitimately a top 5 team based on not what they were the year before, but who they had coming back and who they are. And then they had something go wrong in September. And then at the end of the year, should you be penalized because they were unranked?
No, I mean, I think that's what they all build into it. I'm just saying, like, week number 1, you're going to tell me that Texas is a number 6 team in the country, and then it's clearly, like, the case that they were not, but that still counts as a number 6 win. That's, like, there's not an exact way to do it because I know they would never go for everybody starts off unranked, but I wouldn't be so opposed to, hey, like, at least give it a week, and then you come out after the first week and you have those rankings. It's not that big of a deal to me. I know it's a TV thing, like I said, but it's just, yeah, it's funny to me the rankings, at least in week 1, kind of how that works.
One of the things, and that's why they don't do